Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give others a minute or two to join, so we'll be starting shortly. If you've just joined, we're going to start momentarily. We're just giving people some time to sign in. Okay, I think we've had enough time. We're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the World Went Hybrid. Now what? I want to thank everyone for joining today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them and we'll answer them towards the end or along the way as we're able. My name is Travis Roberts. I'm a product marketing manager at Nerdio, and I'm joined by Phil Schwan. Phil is a manager, cloud endpoint at Netrix Global. We have a few topics to cover today. We start out by reviewing trends and analyst reports on hybrid work. Then we look at the different approaches and tools to support a hybrid workforce. Next, we review case studies of different implementation scenarios, and we'll end with solutions that Nerdio and Netrix provide to help implement and manage hybrid workforces. We'll start out with a review of the hybrid work trends from 2019 till now. Gartner forecasted that 39% of knowledge workers will work hybrid by the end of 2023. Many workers that were office based in 2019 are still not going back to the office, but we have seen a mix of remote and hybrid worker stabilization. For the majority of the cases, we have to plan for a mix of remote and on-site workers. It's no surprise that knowledge workers want the flexibility of remote work. 64% survey said that the freedom to live where they want is important. We had to rapidly adopt collaboration solutions to accommodate a remote workforce. Productivity tool adoption is expected to increase by 14% by the end of 2028. Adopting new productivity tools and adding remote endpoints increases the number of potential threats, especially during the rush to accommodate the remote work. 40% of organizations surveyed indicated some level of intrusion at remote work endpoints.
So a lot of what these trends show is something that's been a larger trend in IT over the last 5 to 6 years, which is more of that modernization and consumerization of IT. So many of us who've been in the industry for a long time uh, remember not that long ago, you would go into an office, you would sit down at an actual physical desk, literally log onto a desktop system. It was on your desk. It was a business-owned device. It was on your local corporate network. You would sign in, use your client server based applications, sit there behind the firewall when it came to the internet. Um, and it was primarily just the company employees that were there in that office. We've seen a shift even before the move to mobile with the result of the COVID-19 pandemic to a more diverse platform. So I remember when the iPhones and the iPads came out, and suddenly end users wanted to be able to access corporate resources, corporate mail on those personal devices. So now we have this mix of both user and business-owned systems, and we're connecting to services that are no longer tied to an on-prem data center. So we have software as a service or SaaS-based apps, cloud-based management. All of this has facilitated that desire to move outside of the traditional legacy realm into a more hybrid and mobile workforce. Because of that, it also expands those network perimeters and requires that more security be implemented as part of that. So this has led to what we see now, and the pandemic and the move towards mobile that came out of that only further heightened what was already in progress in terms of that ability to do really to work anywhere on any device and be able to be productive. So now that new normal is gotten here, it's introduced a great deal of complexity that has to be addressed from an IT standpoint. Obviously, as we're moving outside of a physical location to really any location, internet connected, there's much more risk of exposure from an IT and security standpoint. And because of that, the management platforms and the infrastructure that we use to provide these services needs to have tight integration with those security tools. It also needs to be efficient because we no longer, can walk up to a user's desk and solve their problems or deliver them the assets they need. We need to be able to efficiently and quickly scale up and scale down these resources to meet the constantly shifting demands of the organization. And now you add on top of that recent trends with things like AI being further and further integrated into the systems, as well as AI being a threat when it comes to more advanced attacks. We need to be able to address those things quickly and easily.
Okay, let's talk about AVD, Windows 365, and desktop as a service, that market next. Gartner did a report on the DAS market, or desktop as a service, and came up with some significant findings. 56% of clients told Gartner that they plan to increase spending on the DAS market through 2024. This is driven in part by the need to provide secure solutions that are less prone to cyber threats. 30% of the pandemic inspired DAS expansion will revert back to physical PCs. This is due to being able to quickly go back to that pre pandemic physical computer delivery model. Also, the need for VDI and DAS decline as employees go back to the office. One way I like to look at that, though, is if 30% of pandemic inspired DAS expansion is reverting back, that means 70% of it is staying. Many of the respondents indicated that their use case for multiple delivery approaches, including VDI, desktop as a service, and physical PCs. These organizations are open to flexibility in how to best deliver these services. With that said, digital workplace leaders are finding it increasingly difficult to navigate factors surrounding choices of a desktop delivery. These decisions are guided by the workers, the data, and the service locations. Security requirements and business continuity are also considerations. One problem a lot of organizations ran into during when supporting remote workers was inventory shortages and shipping delays due to the pandemic. This is a problem for physical desktops and VDI environments hosted on premises. Rapidly scaling out the number of VDI desktops in a data center requires additional physical resources like storage, compute, and networking bandwidth. These issues are not a factor with cloud based virtual desktops. Physical desktops have a predictable CapEx cost, but hosted virtual desktops run on an OpEx model, allowing us to scale up and back down while only charged based on the resources used. This is a this is a wide there's a wide variety of industries that can leverage virtual desktops. The cases where they won't be able to work as well, maybe where it's cost prohibitive, for example, with compute intensive applications, or if there's specialty equipment, maybe equipment that requires proprietary interfaces. There are differences between virtual desktops like AVD and desktop as a service, such as Windows 365. Virtual desktops are flexible. We have the option for how they're deployed and managed. Desktops as a service, though, are simpler to deploy, but with that simplicity, we lose some flexibility. For example, with virtual desktops, we can have persistent or non-persistent desktops, meaning the desktop is preserved between reboots or not preserved. And we can use a multi-session OS to support multiple users per computer. Desktop as a service is a dedicated computer for each user. Pricing is another factor. With virtual desktops, are billed based on consumption, and desktop as a service is billed on a set fee per user. So why Microsoft when looking at virtual desktops or desktop as a service? Microsoft has two options: the Microsoft hosted Windows 365 and the Azure hosted Azure Virtual Desktop. The two products complement each other with deployment options that range from simple to highly flexible. Microsoft offers efficiencies with the Microsoft first approach of desktop as a service and Azure Virtual Desktop. Services, software, and licensing are all part of one ecosystem. This provides a single vendor solution. Microsoft offers a Windows 10 and Windows 11 multi-user OS that's only available in Azure. Having multiple users connect to one instance of a computer can lead to a significant cost savings. All this makes Microsoft a leader in the desktop as a service market according to an IDC MarketSpace desktop as a service assessment. Its dominance is due to the Microsoft's ecosystem, including licensing bundles that favor AVD and or Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365, as well as network proximity of the virtual desktops to the Microsoft 365 data, such as email and OneDrive.
So as we're looking at the Microsoft solutions, and really, I want to call out the fact that part of the reason that we're focusing in on the Microsoft solutions in particular is simply because, as a larger trend, what we're seeing with our organizations is that the bulk of our customers are moving in that direction. They're looking to consolidate on this tool set, leverage their existing licensing and infrastructure and management investments. So. By no means are these the only options out there. These are simply the ones that we chose to focus on because this is what we see and are working with every day. So as we're looking at that difference between a virtual desktop solution and desktop as a service, specifically within the Microsoft realm, there's a little bit of a matrix here that kind of helps you see which option may be best. So as Travis mentioned, desktop as a service is really designed around simplicity and efficiency. So if you don't have an existing uh, IT workforce that knows virtual desktop infrastructure, knows how to do the advanced infrastructure work within Azure, then using something like Windows 365 to provide a quick, easy, persistent personal desktop makes sense. It's a complete end-to-end Microsoft solution. So the integration is very tight. It leverages that existing work that's already been done in Intune, for example, if you're using that for your physical devices, really makes the path to roll it out very short. However, as you get into more advanced use cases, Travis mentioned something like more resource intensive, something that requires advanced GPU capabilities, for example, or you need to do something that's simple and non-persistent. So leveraging that multi-session OS model, being able to quickly scale up and scale down resources and operate in more of a consumption-based model. And especially as you're scaling that out into complexity, leveraging something like Nerdio Enterprise Manager to introduce automation and efficiency into that, then that's where AVD makes more sense. It's much more robust, with the trade-off being there's more complexity and more knowledge required. If you're just looking at that persistent personal desktop, so basically a desktop replacement type of VDI solution, it really does depend on what your specific needs are and how your business functions. So if you're looking at more of an OpEx model, then AVD may be the way to go. If you have certain experience that's geared more towards desktop infrastructure, Windows 365 may be the way to go. Versus, if you have more, traditional back-end server infrastructure type resources, again, AVD may be the more logical choice. So it really comes down to what your specific needs are within that particular realm to help determine which of these solutions would work best. More traditional VDI in Azure versus desktop as a service with Windows 365. So just a real quick look from a Windows 365 standpoint, if that's the direction you're headed. And again, we've seen a lot of uptake in this and a lot of interest in this because it solves certain problems. And I'll mention some of those in the case studies that follow. But basically, you're looking at a virtualized desktop and a desktop as a service solution. So it's very much analogous if you're doing physical device management with Intune, for example, and are familiar with Windows Autopilot. It's a very similar style and approach, and that you're doing a quick and simple deployment of a virtual desktop. The users logging in and their applications and settings are coming down from Intune. You can integrate it and make it more advanced with things like hybrid Azure AD join, tying it back to your internal network infrastructure via Azure networking. Tying it in with configuration manager if you're still using that for some of your systems management. All of that's supported, but right out of the box, it's a very simple solution to quickly bring up a Windows machine for the user that it's assigned to. From a provisioning standpoint, to kind of reiterate the easy button aspect of this, there are really only two things required. You need a license for it, and those licenses are broken down by SKUs based on the resources. So for example, 4 CPU, 16 gig of RAM, 256 gig of drive space. That's a SKU. So the user gets assigned a license that corresponds to the hardware specs they want. And then you just assign them a provisioning policy, which basically tells them what version of Windows am I going to install? How is it going to join the directory service? What network connection is it going to have? The service basically is monitoring. As soon as a user has both of those things, it automatically kicks off that process, creates that virtual machine. Within usually about an hour tops, that virtual machine is available. User can then log into it from any platform. Could be from an existing Windows device, could be through a browser, through the remote desktop client, could be from an iOS or Android or Mac OS device as well. It's completely device agnostic in that sense. But they log in, they're able to get that Windows desktop, get that experience with all the configurations and all the integration into the security features that we're accustomed to with that Microsoft platform. So looking at a couple recent case studies that we've seen applying these. One in particular was a global retail organization who is expanding their call center capabilities. So they needed to be able to ramp up their call center support staff on a very short runway in advance of the holiday season, and then be able to pull it back after that. They had some specific requirements around the endpoint. So some of these call center employees were long-term employees of the organization. They had corporate issued devices they would be accessing from, but they had some contractors coming in for the seasonal work that were going to be operating on machines that were not owned by this particular company. They could either be personal laptops, or if they were subcontracted through another company, they may be laptops provided by that organization. But regardless, they were not corporate owned assets in that instance. They also needed to be able to do chargeback for some of these departments, meaning the costs that were associated with these individual employees needed to be charged to a particular part of the organization or to a particular entity. So they needed to very easily be able to track those costs back. And then on top of that, they were leveraging ServiceNow as their ITSM, so they needed to be able to automate processes for provisioning and deprovisioning devices based on that particular system. So we were able to come in and use Windows 365 as the primary virtual solution for them. That enabled them to do that rapid provisioning. As I said, the provisioning process itself was very simple. We were able to create provisioning profiles and Azure network connections that were relevant to the geographic location that these temporary workers were operating under. And through that ServiceNow integration, we were able to automate a great deal of that process and make it much more efficient. And so the end result was they realized a lot of efficiency, a lot of savings, cost savings in particular throughout this process. It made it much more efficient, much less disruptive from an IT perspective going through that process. At the end of the day, the call center employees had everything they needed to. The video and audio performance was adequate to what they needed for that call center software. Everything worked pretty much flawlessly. An additional case study that we saw recently kind of highlights the ability for multiple solutions to coexist and solve different problems while not stepping all over each other. So in this case, there was a US-based healthcare organization we were working with. They were leveraging some of that on-prem VDI solution that was becoming costly to manage and maintain. Getting hardware upgrades was becoming problematic because of the supply chain issues. And they had a lot of different use cases across everything from developers to, again, call center employees and other type of employees that just needed simple access to SaaS-based applications. So we actually ended up implementing not only Microsoft's Azure Virtual Desktop solution, as well as the desktop as a service component with Windows 365, but we also enabled them to put into the mix the preview for Microsoft DevBox. So if you're not familiar with Microsoft DevBox, we didn't really cover it, but it's based off of Windows 365 as a platform, but it's more of a consumption-based model like AVD. The particular aspect of it, though, is it's designed specifically for developers. Has developer tools already integrated into the OS. So when those machines are spun up rapidly, they already include all of the software. This was one of the things that they struggled with previously was, trying to use app layering technologies to deliver, large applications like Visual Studio for the developers. It was very time consuming to maintain it. It didn't work very consistently and caused a lot of end user issues. So in putting those three solutions in place, we were able to address their mainline workers with Windows 365, having a stable and familiar desktop experience on that. We were able to address non-persistent and multi-session usage for some of the employees that were using SaaS-based applications, and able to rapidly scale that up and scale that down. We implemented Nerdio Enterprise Manager on top of that to help, introduce features like auto scaling and other things to keep those consumption-based costs under control and really optimize the efficiency of managing that system. And then again, putting DevBox in place enabled their developers to rapidly spin up machines and be able to do the work they needed to do without waiting for applications to come down to them via streaming technology.
All right. So AVD can be managed with the native tools, native Azure tools. It's all available. We can use it. We can deploy and manage AVD from the portal, ARM templates, or a PowerShell script, for example. However, not all organizations have the skills or time to develop automations for things like creating images. I've worked with a few companies who have typically it's an infrastructure group or maybe a support group or desktop support who are tasked with deploying AVD. And AVD is at the root of it is simple to deploy and stand up. But when we start talking about custom images, applications, connectivity back to on-prem networks, it becomes very complicated. And asking them to create custom PowerShell automations and things like DevOps pipeline to update images, that becomes very troubling. So and even with Windows 365, Windows 365 can be very simple to deploy, but if you have to connect back to Windows AD, for example, that introduces additional complexities with network connectivity and then routing and that kind of stuff. So Nerdio, though, simplifies AVD and Windows 365 with a suite of tools for all of the items listed on the screen. And there's always new ones being added. For example, Nerdio has advanced auto scaling that can stop or even remove session hosts during times of low usage and bring them back online when the demand increases. This can provide significant cost savings for that deployment. Administrators don't have to create scripts and manage automation jobs. Nerdio has built-in scripted actions for scheduling that makes management much easier. Uh, it provides custom RBAC roles, so lower privileged accounts can take on portions of AVD and Windows 365 management. There's also applications and endpoint management built in. Those are just a few examples of the advantage of Nerdio that Nerdio has to offer with AVD and Windows 365.
So how can Netrix Global, how can Nerdio help you on this virtualization journey as we're dealing with the reality of everything in a hybrid workforce now, and specifically looking at virtualization? How can you move forward with this? Um, so there are kind of three main areas we look at. That's advisement, helping you understand what the options are, how best to move forward with it. Actual deployment, so getting things in place, getting them up and running, getting them configured according to your needs, and then running with it. Basically, how do we support this operationally going forward? So from an advisement standpoint, some examples of the things that are available are some packaged offerings, some of them, which are funded by Microsoft, which basically walk you through those details. So for example, the Microsoft Next Gen Windows Workshop takes a look at the different options available for more modern management, including both Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. There's also things like a Windows 365 readiness assessment or an Azure Virtual Desktop readiness assessment that basically looks at your any existing VDI infrastructure, looking at what your needs are, seeing how one or the other of those can best address those use cases, or possibly if you've already started down that path and just need the guidance to know what the next steps are. Those readiness assessments can give you that readout of and roadmap of what would come next. When it comes to a deployment standpoint, again, there are a few specific options around the Microsoft Windows 365 standardized pilot, which basically gives not only an understanding and some education around what Windows 365 is and how it works, but actually helps your organization set up a production pilot of that in your production tenant to get some initial cloud PCs spun up, make sure that they're configured and that the design addresses the use cases that you have, and get that moving forward into some users' hands so that you can do a proof of concept and ultimately pilot it, make sure that it works for what you need. There's also the option, a very similar option around Azure Virtual Desktop. So setting up a proof of concept, which is just answering a question: will this work for us? Will this address some certain need? Yes or no. Or actually setting up a production pilot, knowing that this is what we want to do, and we just need to get it through the initial configuration stages to the point where it can be deployed, and then it can be handed off to your organization to handle the actual full-scale deployment. On top of that, we've mentioned several times Nerdio as a great tool for being able to manage these at an enterprise level, being able to scale these things out and ensure as much efficiency and cost savings as possible. So this doesn't need to be done at the very outset. So, possibly you already have Azure Virtual Desktop in your environment and you're looking to realize some of those efficiencies and be able to scale it up further. That's where Nerdio can be installed and brought into the environment in that existing implementation, and begin to leverage that to scale it out and further manage it going forward. Um, again, all of these solutions, there's always the need for professional services help to help integrate those into your existing solutions. So I mentioned, previously when we were talking about Windows 365 about leveraging something like Configuration Manager. If you're still an SCCM shop and still using that for a lot of this and need to know how to implement co-management, how to get that tied in and be able to use it with Windows 365, making sure that networking is in place, whether you're using Cloud Management Gateway for the communication, or if you need to route it back internally and need help with the Azure networking. All of these things are things that we have experience with and can help guide you through to get those things implemented so that you can get this to full production readiness and be able to deploy it and run it in your environment. And then, of course, when it comes to that operational support, helping you, either giving you guidance on how you need to manage this going forward with your existing infrastructure, or if you're interested in more of a managed services approach. Netrix Global in particular, our managed services side, we actually leverage Nerdio Enterprise Manager to be able to help manage Azure Virtual Desktop for our clients. So helping to introduce that same efficiency, giving you the visibility, the reporting, as well as the cost savings. But again, you not having to shoulder the burden of the infrastructure and engineering to do the care and feeding for that. So with that, I'll leave some additional information here as far as if you want to schedule one of these assessments or have any questions, need to reach out for anything that you found of interest from what you saw here today. You can contact via that information link there and reach out, and we can provide that information. And with that, I posted an announcement just as a reminder, but if you have any questions about any of the stuff we talked about, whether it's just general trends, specifics around particular solutions, specifics around Windows 365, AVD, Nerdio Enterprise Manager, basically anything that we've covered today, we have some time here to answer questions. So please drop those questions in the chat. We'll monitor those here for the next few minutes and try to address any that come up. Other than that, thank you for your time. Travis, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, just thank everyone for joining today. We appreciate it.
Yeah. So we'll give it a couple minutes here. Again, if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat here, and we'll try to get those addressed as quickly as possible. I'll mention while we're waiting for questions, I'll toss another use case out there that I've seen. A lot of organizations are doing tenant consolidations as they move to consolidate their licensing and get more efficiency. Maybe their enterprise agreement is up for renewal, or they're looking to split off to two different companies, or they're acquiring new companies. One of the great advantages in leveraging something like Windows 365, for example, and I've seen this with a couple of organizations now, is being able to quickly, in the event of an acquisition, being able to quickly provide the desktop experience, the applications, everything that's needed from that parent organization standpoint to those new employees. So a lot of times during those acquisitions, we're coming over with hardware that belong to the company that's being acquired. That hardware was configured for their applications, their solutions, their use cases, and now they're being brought into a parent organization, which may have a completely different application set, completely different requirements, whatever the case may be. That transition can be difficult sometimes, especially if you're doing, Azure AD only devices. The whole user data migration component may be difficult. Sometimes you're not quite ready to reset those devices. If you have autopilot enabled, for example, you're not ready to reset those devices right away and bring them on board into the new organization. Windows 365 provides a really, really good ability to day one be able to provide them with a standardized desktop for that new parent organization, allow them to keep up and running right out of the gate, but also still have whatever is locally installed on their physical device. If they have stuff they need to work on transferring over, continue to work in some of the legacy systems until those are brought over and so forth. So just another one of those examples of how this can actually make what would otherwise be a very costly and resource intensive engagement be a little easier and more palatable for the end users from their experience, keeping them productive throughout. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions. We'll give it maybe 2 more minutes for any questions that anybody wants to drop in there. Travis, I don't know if you have any sort of off the cuff things that you've seen that you might want to add in.
Yeah, you talked about multi-tenant. That's a very interesting area with AVD. Nerdio does have support for multi-tenants, but all of the users have to be in one of the two tenants. So
yeah, it's a good example of some of the things that I've seen the Nerdio product introduce to be able to better manage the larger environments.
yeah.
All of those things, the efficiencies really come into play. The more the bigger the scale you're looking at. So um,
There was a trend, especially in mergers and acquisitions, of moving people to Azure, to the cloud. And now that a lot of organizations have moved there, the trend now is integrating them, integrating tenants or moving people over. And what we're finding is there's not the same tools that we had with like Windows domain migrations where you could do trust relationships. There's
yeah,
guest accounts, but those don't work the same way. So it's a very interesting area once you start doing mergers and acquisitions between tenants.
yes, absolutely, yes. We've seen that in several projects just recently. There are definitely a lot of complexities. Everybody remembers using USMT and some other things for doing data migration on the endpoint side, and some of these other Quest tools and things like that made Active Directory domain migrations easy. But when we talk about Azure tenants and moving things between those, especially both on the endpoint and on the tenant side, it gets a lot more complicated. So yeah, we've definitely seen a lot of trending towards that and working through that. So, all right, no further questions have come in. So at this point, again, thank you for all who attended. We really appreciate your time. If you have any other questions that about the services that we provide or any of the technical details, again, feel free to fire those over at info@netrixllc.com, and we'll get those addressed as quickly as we can. But thank you very much for everybody's time, and we'll end the program at this point.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.